your employees, your co-workers, everybody is safe and sound. I know we live in pretty unprecedented times. I hope all of you are doing well. Let me just take a moment to share my screen. Give me a minute. Okay, awesome. So over the next hour or so, this is what I have planned. We look at a couple of very interesting inflection points that kind of slip below the radar, in the last year or so. That's something that we will look at. Not the regular kind of inflection points that I'm sure most of you must be aware of, which essentially have to do with the levels of digital penetration and the kind of rate of growth of the digital ecosystem in India. But I'm going to talk to you about a couple of very interesting inflection points, which a lot of people did not even notice. Yeah, and it has a lot of very interesting implications for us as digital entrepreneurs. That's something that I will talk about. Then I will talk about the impact that the pandemic has actually had on the startup ecosystem in the country. Essentially, we'll be talking about this from the vantage point that we at Razorpay have, which gives us a ringside perspective into the goings on of the entire ecosystem. We'll then try to break this up into a couple of different parts. One essentially will be on the, from an acquisition perspective. So as a marketer, or even as a business owner who is looking to build a strong digital brand and accelerate acquisition, there are two strong problem statements you're looking to solve against. One essentially is on customer acquisition, wherein you want to make sure that you acquire newer and newer customers and you push the envelope on brand awareness. And the second is on engagement and nurturing of people who have already entered your funnel, who have some kind of a brand affinity, right? So for both of these, we will look at case studies. So the rest of the presentation would be, forked in two pieces. We look at customer acquisition first. We look at what are some of the best practices. We look at a case study from Healthify. Then from an engagement perspective, we look at what are some of the best practices. We look at a case study from Simplilearn, both of which were my previous experiences. Then we will look at a couple of topics towards the end, which are very close to my heart. One essentially on repeat business. How do you as a brand drive a lot of repeat behavior? That is something that we will look at. We look at a failure and a success story. I believed it back then, and I believe it even more now, that we learn a lot more from our failures than we do from our successes. So we will look at that. And then towards the end, we look at what are the various ways and means by which you can actually create digital brand exposure for your business. We look at three means by which you can actually create brand exposure. Two of which are extremely popular, especially with startups and SMEs in the Indian ecosystem, but the third one is very underutilized. So we look at what the third one is as well. Yeah, Joel and the Thai Kerala team, does this look like a good structure? And I thought, as far as Q&A is concerned, please keep the questions flowing in the chat window. I will take them towards the end. We will have 30 minutes towards the end. The presentation should be finished in an hour or so, and I think we'll have 30 minutes afterwards for taking question and answers. Does that sound like a plan, Joel?
Yes, sir. Sure, that's fine. That's fine. Yeah, just the questions should be mentioned in the Q&A section.
Please put it up on the chat window, and I will take all the questions in the last half an hour.
Okay, sir.
Awesome. So over the last year or so, we've seen a couple of very interesting inflection points which have kind of slipped below the radar. I'll take you through what both of those are. The first one was essentially this, right? Wherein for the first time ever, Google search via the browser web was not the number one numero uno logical entry point for Indians looking to discover the World Wide Web. It was actually the Google search via the Play Store, which was particularly interesting. And this has some pretty interesting and fundamental implications for digital entrepreneurs. It means that if you're looking to build a digital brand presence, the mobile app needs to be the front, middle, and center of your overall digital brand presence building strategy. If you're a digital marketer, it means that mobile marketing needs to be the fulcrum of your overall digital marketing strategy. And the second inflection point, which is something that we also need to look at, is that what you see here is all of the various phases that a brand goes through across its life cycle of growth in a prospect psyche, wherein a brand moves from awareness wherein awareness is first seeded about the brand. Then it moves into consideration and evaluation, where a prospect gets closer and closer towards making a purchase decision. And the brand moves from a long list of being considered to a short list of brands being evaluated. And then the eventual holy grail, right? The final act of purchase, where a prospect whips out his or her credit card, debit card, and pays for the product. Now, despite the huge exponential growth of digital in India over the last several years, this very popular symbol, the television set, was the #1 awareness, brand awareness building vehicle in the country. And that changed for the first time in the year 2020, when all of these extremely popular digital symbols, digital media properties, YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook, became the #1 reach building channels. And television actually moved a step further down and became more of a brand reinforcement channel, which influences brand consideration, which is again particularly interesting, and again attests to the kind of exponential growth that digital has seen in the last year. It's quite often I joke that it's been like we've been in a time machine, at least as far as the digital ecosystem is concerned. And if you had gotten into the time machine and woken up at a point 5 years later, that's how it's been the last 1 year. It's been like all of the change that might have happened in India over a 5-year time frame, that's actually happened in a single year. Moving on, the impact of the pandemic on the startup ecosystem itself. Let's just spend a few minutes in talking about that. And this is from our vantage point at Razorpay, where we process the entire cycle of money movement, both inward money movement, where the businesses can receive payments from their end customers through our payment gateway, payment link, payment page products, and outward money movement, which is being managed by our suite of business banking solutions, or Razorpay X. And there, as part of Razorpay X, we also offer current account facilities, etc. And we've seen a huge growth of a lot of, obviously, e-commerce has always been there. We've seen a huge growth of edtech and health tech companies, both B2C and B2B. Today's caselets will be focused on, edtech and health tech. And I'm sure a lot of people in the audience today would be from those industries, edtech and health tech. I would not be surprised. IT, SaaS, and gaming has also grown, which is again intuitive because people are stuck at home. They want ways and means to upskill and reskill themselves, which explains the growth of edtech. They want ways and means to discover healthier and fitter versions of themselves, which explains the growth of health tech. Gaming, of course, for entertainment. And the other interesting thing is that a lot of digital entrepreneurs coming in today who are looking to build digital businesses, startup businesses, they are not, while they understand the importance and the implications of digital, they don't necessarily understand nor appreciate the nitty-gritties and the nuts and bolts of technology, right? Some of the technology inner workings, and nor do they want to. They want that level of complexity abstracted away from them, which explains the growth of a lot of our hashtag no-code products, which has been particularly interesting. We've seen a lot of growth of, from tier 2 and below, which has also been particularly interesting. And the other interesting thing is that a lot of these businesses are not just flaky fly-by-night operators. These are businesses processing more and more monies through the Razorpay ecosystem, which again has been interesting. And we've been observing a lot of these headwinds across both the inward money movement cycle, pay-ins and payouts, which has been very interesting. So some very exciting signs and some interesting signs as we look ahead to the next 12, 24, and 36 months for the future of India's digital ecosystem and the startup ecosystem. Moving on, as I said earlier, the pandemic has brought digital to the forefront like never before. And one of the consistent points of feedback that I often hear from various startup founders, business owners, entrepreneurs, is that while they understand the various aspects of digital marketing, various channels of digital, right, Facebook, SEM, SEO, LinkedIn, etc., but what they struggle with and need help on is in trying to understand for their business, for their dhanda, what needs to be the #1 priority, what needs to be the P0. So what I will do over the next few minutes is give you some simple rules of thumb or some frameworks using which you can make these kinds of prioritization decisions for your business. Given that your time is limited, your resources are limited, your people are limited, your financial resources are limited, it makes sense for you to know which is your #1 channel. Obviously, you need to do a combination of efforts across channels and it all adds up, but you need to know what your #1 focus needs to be. So we will look at how do you actually prioritize. I'm sure most of you here in the audience would be aware of what each of these channels mean. SEM, SEO, etc. But let me spend 30 seconds in giving you a quick crash course for those who might be unaware. So let's say that Joyer is looking to plan a holiday in Tekadi, for example, right? And he searches for resorts in Tekadi. And you have various people bidding for that particular keyword. So when somebody searches for something on Google, what happens is you have a real-time auction that is actually happening. And it's very similar to a OnePlus phone being auctioned in the real world. This is a virtual auction which is happening with various brands bidding prices for the right to serve the first placement of their advertisement for that particular keyword search. So if say Joel is looking for resorts in Tekadi and Make My Trip has bid say $100 for that keyword, and Booking.com has bid $200 and Oyo Rooms has bid say $300. In this particular case, and there are a lot of factors that determine whose ad comes up first, but for the most part, it is determined by who bids the highest. In this case, given that Oyo has bid the highest, their ad would come up first. And if Joel were to click on that ad, Oyo would be charged $300 by Google. This is called cost per click advertising. And all of the efforts that you as a marketer undertake to make sure that these advertisements, these would have the tag ad. These would be served up right up front, below the search query, and would have the tag listed like ad, listed against them. All of these different advertisements that you run as a marketer, and all of the efforts that you undertake to make sure that these advertisements are bubbled up on the Google search results is referred to as search engine marketing, SEM. And you can manage all of these ads through a platform that Google provides called the Google AdWords console. Yep. Now that is SEM. Now, if you scroll a little further down in the same page, you would see a bunch of listings which do not have the ad tag listed against them. These are called organic listings, and these are based purely on merit. It's got nothing to do with who bids the highest. So if you were to click on any particular listing, that brand would not be charged any money. They don't have the tag ad listed against them. And this is purely based on Google's organic search ranking algorithms determination of which landing page, which website has the most relevant content, has the freshest content, has the best user experience, has the least bounce rate, has the maximum number of link backs from other authoritative domain sources, and is the most relevant for that user search query. And all of the efforts that you as a marketer undertake to make sure that you have all of this, right? Relevant, fresh content, link backs from other authoritative sources, etc., is referred to as SEO, search engine optimization. Yep. Now, Facebook and LinkedIn advertising, of course, I'm sure most of you are aware. Now, how do you decide for your dhanda, which is your number one priority? The first question you ask yourself, let's say Joel is an entrepreneur, he wants to know what to prioritize. The first question he asks himself, Joel, is the product or the category that I'm operating in, is that mass or is that niche? Right now, there are a couple of different ways in which Joel can answer this question. Right, one is he has an entrepreneur's subjective gut-based instinct. He knows that he sells t-shirts online, it's mass. He does mental wellness programs online, he's probably niche. He has this gut-based instinct. The second one is more, objective and data-backed, using which he can either validate or challenge this original hypothesis, which essentially is he opens up the Google keyword, Google AdWords tool, within which there is a tool called as a Google Keyword Planner. And he essentially searches for the number of keywords which are being searched for in that particular target geography every single month. Yeah, he makes that search. And if your target market is India, assuming a target market is India, which has the kind of internet population size that it has, this is a small rule of thumb. And this is not a perfect science, is that if the number of monthly searches for the core keywords related to your category. So Joel says doing mental wellness. He's running a company that provides online mental wellness classes. He searches for keywords which are around mental wellness classes online, right? Mental therapy online, right? Top keywords like these. And he sees the number of keyword searches happening every single month. If that count is less than 15,000-20,000 a month, then you can consider the space that you operate in to be niche. If it is greater than 15,000-20,000 a month, you can consider it to be mass. Now, what does this mean? If it is mass, then what you do is you make Google, which is a combination of SEM and SEO, search engine marketing and search engine optimization efforts, your number one priority. Why is that? Because it makes the most intuitive sense. You need to be where your customers are. There are already a lot of customers searching for keywords related to the category or the space that you're operating in. It makes sense for you to be there as a brand, right? It makes sense for you to ride that wave. Not all of us can be an Amazon or a Flipkart, and we may not be able to create new user behavior, but we can very well piggyback on existing user behavior, which is already there on Google. So all you need to do is to make sure that you have the right kind of advertisements. If you don't have the money, the right kind of content, so that your SEO, links start bubbling up higher and higher for relevant keyword pools. So if you're mass, which means there is already a lot of existing demand out there, prioritize Google. Make that your number one focus. Now, what happens if you're niche, right? In Joel's case, he's probably niche because he's selling mental wellness programs online, right? Hypothetically. You don't directly run into Facebook's arms. So what you do is you ask yourself an additional question. Am I as a brand am I operating in a category which gives me the opportunity to strike a very strong personal connect with my end customer? And do I have the opportunity to inject a very strong visual element in my marketing communication, right? That's a second question you ask yourself. If so, you prioritize Facebook. Let me give you an example. When I first joined Healthify Me, it was a huge culture shock for me, because for the first time in my life, Facebook was the number one dhanda driver. It was not Google. It was not Google search. In all of my previous experiences, it was Facebook had worked more as a brand channel with very limited and flaky ROI. But in the Healthify Me case, Facebook was the number one dhanda driver and breadwinner. And I'll tell you why. That was because Healthify Me was operating in the space of health and fitness, which enables weight loss for individuals. It's a freemium app. The free parts involve a calorie counter, which is like a daily diary of all of the food intake. Let's say Bonnie has had a plate of puttu for breakfast. He wants to know how many calories he's consumed, how many vitamins, minerals, proteins, etc. He can track all that. And because the app has the largest database of Indian foods that are mapped to accurate calorie breakdowns. It could be an exotic dish from Mizoram, Andaman, Lakshadweep, Kashmir, Kanyakumari, it doesn't matter. It could be anything. Now, so that is the free aspect. And let's say Bonnie has done a set of Surya Namaskars today morning. He wants to log that, he can do that. It makes Bonnie a lot more mindful of his eating habits and workout patterns. Now, the freemium, it's a freemium app, as I said, which is free plus premium. The premium service involves personalized health, fitness, yoga plans based on the health goals of the individual through its team of nutritionists and virtual AI chatbots. Now, in the Healthify Me case, because it enables people to lose weight, it enables a 40-something man to overcome hypertension and diabetes and overcome a beer belly, which he has got because of a sedentary lifestyle. It enables a 20-something young man to gain a six-pack ab and muscle up. It enables a 20-something young woman to gain strength and flexibility. It enables a 30-something woman who's in middle age, who's just become a mother, a young mother, to actually, she's put on a lot of weight. It enables her, somebody like her, to lose that excess baby fat, post-pregnancy baby fat, and rediscover a healthier and fitter self. Essentially, it's very close to the identity of an individual. Health and fitness and weight loss is very close to the identity of an individual, the individual's makeup. So it is operating in that space. So the brand's sandbox has a very close proximity to the personal identity of the individual. Plus, of course, as a brand, we did very limited talking ourselves. All the communication that we did was testimonial led and video led, where we had our customers come forward and have authentic retellings of the kind of life transformations that they had seen, by using the app, how many kilograms they lost, how they overcome diabetes, hypertension, etc. All of this works really well on Facebook, right? Strong personal connect, check. Very strong visual element being injected in the marketing communications, which can strike a lot of empathy, video led, check. For these reasons, in Healthify Me's case, Facebook was the number one dhanda driver. So if you operate in a similar kind of a space, which is proactive health tech, for example, the kind of space that a Healthify Me or a Cult Fit operate in, where the person is not actually sick, but they are worried that they might get sick and they want to be proactive about it. Or if it is, say, fashion tech, Myntra, Nykaa, etc., which is again an involved purchase, has a very strong personal connect, then Facebook, make Facebook your number one priority. And if you're fairly niche, of course. Now, of course, if you're operating in the B2B space, and if you're speaking to personae, right, or to your target companies, influencers, and the decision makers in your target companies to whom you're speaking to reside on LinkedIn. Like, for example, if you're selling products for technology companies, or for example, at Healthify Me, we used to sell corporate wellness programs for technology companies, large marquee brands in India. And we were selling essentially to HR heads, CHROs, right, directors of HR and above. And there essentially a lot of these people were active on LinkedIn. They were there on LinkedIn, so we made LinkedIn a focus. But not in all B2B cases will LinkedIn work, right? So there could be a you could be an edtech company which is selling to school principals, for example, in which case LinkedIn will not really work for you, right? There are not too many school principals on LinkedIn. Digital may not even be the answer. You've got to look at a combination of events and channel partnerships potentially. And of course, LinkedIn also works in B2C if you're potentially targeting white collar working professionals like we did at Simply Learn. Yeah. Moving on, what happens if you're not that lucky and your niche, and it's a double whammy, your niche, right, to begin with, and you're low on personal connect. The nature of the category is such. Like, for example, at Razorpay, we are niche. We are a B2B payments company. We are not a peer-to-peer payments company like a PhonePe or a Paytm or a Google Pay. And our target customer is the SME entrepreneur, the SME founder, people like yourself, right? And the nature of a category is such, the entrepreneur is not going to wake up in the morning and get excited about the fact that they go to use a payment gateway or a payment link. The nature of a category is such. We are low on personal connect. We can't take that personally, pun intended. Then what do? Right? It's a double whammy. I'm niche. I don't have too many people searching for relevant keywords on Google. Plus, I'm low on personal connect. What do? Then what you do is you go back to Google and you prioritize SEO, search engine optimization, but for keywords which are slightly neighboring to the keywords that are relevant for your business, for your dhanda. So in this case, we create content for payment specific keywords, but what we also do is we create content for keywords that are not actually relevant for my business in the here and the now, but have much higher keyword demand volumes. Payments has very limited keyword demand volume. So I'll focus on keywords which have much higher keyword demand volumes, not relevant to my business, but still relevant for my target persona, still relevant for my target customer. I will create content around that. So for example, I'll create content around how do you use digital marketing to grow your business? How do you read a P&L and a balance sheet as a first-time entrepreneur? How do you navigate the GST maze as a first-time entrepreneur? I'll create content around all of these different content topics. And this will not give me business results in the near term, but it gives my brand exposure to a larger volume of eyeballs. It enables me to get them in as part of the funnel, engage, nurture them over a period of time, and then monetize them. So in summary, if you're massy, you focus on Google. If you're not that lucky, if you're niche but can strike a strong personal connect, focus on Facebook. If you're B2B and your key decision makers, influencers in your target companies are on LinkedIn, like for example, HR, technology heads, marketing heads, sales heads, etc., and it's a technology company, focus on LinkedIn. White collar working professionals, focus on LinkedIn. If you're not that lucky in the B2B space and you don't necessarily have people who are fairly tech savvy and are on LinkedIn, you've got to focus on non-digital channels, events, channel partnerships, etc. If you're niche and low on personal connect, right? If it's a double whammy, then you focus on keywords, you focus on SEO, not just on keywords related to your category, but you also focus on keywords which are slightly ancillary or neighboring to your category, but still relevant for the target customer. In Razorpay's example that I gave you, all of the topics that I mentioned, digital marketing for your business, GST, P&L, balance sheet reading, etc., is all relevant for the entrepreneur. It's not relevant to what I do today, which is payments, but it's relevant for my target customer. So I get them in and they have much larger keyword demand volumes than just payment gateway keywords. So it gives my brand exposure to a larger volume of customers, prospects, gets them in as part of the funnel. I engage, nurture them over time, and then convert them into paying customers. Yeah. Moving on, let's look at a quick case study of what we did at Healthify.me, which is today, India's largest health and tech mobile fitness app with over 25 million users. And for the reasons that I mentioned earlier, the key elements of the mobile marketing recipe, the number one there in the list of elements was Facebook, for the reasons that I mentioned earlier. But what over time, Google and Google's UAC campaigns became a very close second, and I'll tell you how. When we first launched campaigns on Google through something called as Universal App Campaigns, that was launched around 4 or 5 years ago by Google, and it essentially became the de facto way in which you could drive app install campaigns if you had a mobile app. And a lot of advertisers hated it when it was first launched, because as an advertiser, you had to essentially give up control to Google and essentially say, in Google Baba, we trust. Right? Because earlier you could decide whom to target, when to target, and with what. Now Google, you had to essentially give your Play Store listing, your iTunes listing, creatives, landing page, copy, etc. And Google would decide which ad to surface to which customer when. Yeah. Which is why advertisers hated it. And when we first launched UAC campaigns as well, the results were pretty poor. Right? It came a distant second to Facebook. But what we did was we persisted with these campaigns, and we did a really good job of instrumenting something called as the Google Pixel, which essentially is a piece of JavaScript code which you can paste in your website or your apps code base. And this keeps sending information back into the Google ecosystem. Let me explain with a simple example. Let's say Bonnie comes and signs up on the Healthify.me app. He registers on the Healthify.me app. He has just completed a registration. He's given his details. He's given his health goals, etc. He has just completed an upstream event as part of his engagement and life cycle with the brand, with the Healthify.me app. We call it an upstream event because it's fairly early on, right? Now, this information is sent back, anonymized and aggregated, no personally identifiable information. Information is sent back into the Google ecosystem. Now, Bonnie continues to, log the fact that he had, tea and biscuits. He had, puttu for breakfast. He went for a 10-kilometer jog, and then he keeps consuming content on the Healthify.me app. These are all midstream events, and this information again is fed back. He eventually purchases a 6-month yoga plan on the Healthify.me app. Again, a downstream event. This information is again sent back into the Google ecosystem. Now, after we've done all this, what I tell Google is this. I tell Google, listen, Google, I love Bonnie. Go find me 100 more clones of this guy. Right? Go find me more such people like Bonnie. Go find me more such people who have the same digital kundali, who exhibit the same digital footprints and digital behavior patterns as Bonnie. Google doesn't have any personally identifiable information to play with, but Google's AI-backed machine learning algorithms, go and crawl the World Wide Web to go find more clones of Bonnie. Now, Google's algorithm's ability to go find more of these clones is fairly limited when it has a limited data set to play with. It just has the information of one Bonnie. But as I keep persisting with this platform and I keep sending Google information of 100 Bonnies, and I ask Google to go find the next 10,000 or the next 100,000, Google's accuracy improves. And that's what we did at Healthify, where we persisted with UAC campaigns, and over time their accuracy improved and it became a very close second to Facebook over 3 quarters. And this is what I like to refer to as inside out targeting. The traditional form of targeting is outside in, wherein you as a marketer sit in your iStar and you decide who your ideal persona is, and then you run campaigns according to that. In this case, we let data and user behavior patterns, which is fed back into programmatic platforms like Google and Facebook, actually make the determination of who your ideal customer persona is. Yeah. For example, at Healthify, when we first started, we thought the millennial was the ideal customer persona. Turns out it wasn't. It was actually people who are beyond the millennial age bracket who are the ideal, customers. And that was something that we did a really good job of. We also did a fairly good job of App Store optimization. In fact, a really good job of App Store optimization. You can think of ASO, App Store optimization, as SEO, search engine optimization's cousin, but for the app ecosystem. Yeah, and this essentially makes sure that for relevant search queries happening on the Play Store, on the iTunes Store, on the Play Store and on the iTunes Store, your app's listing comes up on top. And because of the fact that we did a really good job of ASO, even during months and quarters when marketing dollars were hard to come by, marketing rupees, budgets were hard to come by, budgets were slashed, our scale never dropped because we've done a really good job of organic marketing in the app world. We did a very good job of in-app marketing. So we used to target specific user cohorts, which were high probability of conversion cohorts with specific interventions. Are you interested in a 7-day free trial? Are you interested in a free diet consultation? Hooks like these. For example, I knew using data that people coming from a tier 1 city would convert better than people coming from tier 2. People using an iPhone convert better than people using an Android. People who have a history of a lifestyle condition like a hypertension or a diabetes convert better than those who don't. So using data points like these, I used to create a blended lead score. Higher the lead score, greater the probability of conversion. And for the top probability of conversion cohorts, I used to target them with these kinds of in-app marketing hooks. Email marketing, we did a really good job of this. More on that when we get into the Simplilearn case study. And AMP. AMP essentially stands for Accelerated Mobile Pages. It's a simple infrastructural tweak you make your mobile website's code to make sure that your mobile site loads really quickly. Yeah. Moving on, so far we focused on customer acquisition and how do you prioritize your various digital marketing efforts. Now let's look at things from an engagement and nurture perspective. What are some of the best practices for you to follow? First of all, engagement and nurturing stands for how do you work with your current pipeline of leads, right? People who have already entered your funnel, have some kind of an affinity towards your brand, and how do you monetize them? How do you extract juice out of them? And how do you convert them into paying customers, right? And how do you automate all of these interventions across various touch points? SMS, email, WhatsApp, browser notifications, etc. Right? Now, let's try and understand this with a simple example. Let's say that Bonnie is interested in learning digital marketing. He comes and signs up on Simplilearn. Right? On the first day, as soon as he signs up for the program, he would get an email, SMS, WhatsApp, browser notifications, etc., which says, congrats, Bonnie, on taking the first step, on looking to build a career in digital marketing, etc., etc. A few days after that, he would get an communication, let me put it that way, which is a generic term, across channels, which essentially says, here are some of the latest and greatest blogs that we have curated and handpicked specifically for you on digital marketing, which will help you, build your career here. Nothing salesy so far, if you notice. And then a few days after that, Bonnie gets a communication that says, here are testimonials, Bonnie, of people exactly like yourself who have seen an advancement in their career after having taken this program. A few days after that, Bonnie gets an invitation for a webinar which is being conducted by an industry leader, a webinar like this, which essentially helps Bonnie gain more trust around the brand, helps the brand develop more credibility. A few days after that, Bonnie gets a 20% discount code that expires in 48 hours. Right, which is the slam dunk or the brand moving in for the kill. So far, first 17 days, Bonnie did not receive a single salesy communication. But on day 18, Bonnie has now got the sales pitch. Right, this is what is referred to as a classic marketing drip campaign. It's called a drip because very similar to water dripping out of a tap, one after another, these communications also go out one after another. And what the brand has very successfully done is they have warmed up and engaged Bonnie over the first 17 days. Then they have gone in for the sales pitch. They didn't do it upfront, right? Very interesting and very intelligent by the brand. And that is also because they know that the sales life cycle is wrong. They know that Bonnie is not running away anywhere. Historical data shows them that on an average, the sales life cycle, which is the average time it takes for a lead to become a paying customer, is around 1 month for Simplilearn. So they know that they have the luxury of time. It's a test match. They know that they have 30 days to play with. So they are slowly taking that time. They are building up, warming Bonnie up before going in for the kill. It's not like you're buying a chewing gum, right? It's not like he's ordering pizza. He's not in a hurry, right? He'll take his time. So they are using this time well to build credibility for themselves. Bonnie will do window shopping, right? He'll compare several players. He'll want to understand the brand, the syllabus, the course, the instructors, right? Before he makes his decision. And these are high ticket value purchases, right? 15, 20,000 rupees. So Bonnie will take his time. Now, all of the efforts that you as a marketer undertake to make sure that all of these communication templates go out across channels at specific points in time to specific customer segments is orchestrated by a platform known as marketing automation platform. Given you here a bunch of different popular brand names, HubSpot, Acton, Marketo, etc., which are some of the world's leading marketing automation platforms. HubSpot is a world's leader, and Salesforce also has a marketing automation module. But unfortunately enough, most of these platforms are completely unaffordable for if you're a bootstrapped early stage startup. More value for money, brand names are given here, which is ActiveCampaigns, Zoho, Freshworks, and WebEngage, which are more value for money. And when you are fairly small on scale, you can make do with a lot of these different platforms. And as you grow, once your list size crosses 50, 100,000, etc., then you can look at one of these products that I mentioned, some of these other brands that I mentioned, which are a lot more expensive. Otherwise, you can make do if you're an early stage company with one of these brands. Now, there are a couple of different ways in which you can use engagement and nurturing at the highest level possible, at the most philosophical level. One is as part of the transaction life cycle itself in driving conversions, right? That is one way. In the example that I mentioned, right, in Bonnie's case, where Simplilearn used engagement and nurturing to make Bonnie a paying customer as part of that life cycle. The second is you can drive stickiness and loyalty. This is used more by brands which have a small conversion time window to play with. Very small time frame. It's like a T20 match, like Domino's Pizza, right? Where the sales life cycle is 5 minutes, right? Bonnie is hungry. He's in a hurry. He's not going to wait to get engaged and nurtured and see the drip communication from Domino's before making a decision. Bonnie will make his decision really quickly, right? So Domino's doesn't have time to engage and nurture Bonnie. So that transaction is gone. They can't really influence that. But what they can very well do is the next time that Bonnie is thinking of ordering pizza, they stay top of mind. So they keep sending Bonnie information of the latest and greatest paneer toppings, vegetarian toppings, seafood toppings, etc. On the pizza that they have, so that the next time Bonnie wants to order pizza, Domino's is top of mind. So you can still influence repeat behavior, brand loyalty, and customer stickiness in cases, especially in cases where the sales life cycle is very small. By small, I mean less than a day. Make My Trip for flights, very similar. People will order the flight and book the flight in less than 30 minutes. The other use case for engagement and nurturing is refunneling users back. The classic marketing funnel is this, right? You've got traffic on top, leads in the middle, customers at the bottom. It's called a funnel because you have customers dropping off at various points. Now, at Simplilearn, for example, we used to call them dead leads, right? Because not because the leads were wrong from a targeting perspective, but the sales team had tried their best and given up on. So we would every 6 months reinstitute a drip which would try to revive them, saying we've improved, we've changed, can we reinitiate conversations, essentially to refunnel them back. They've dropped outside the funnel. Can I put them back into the funnel? That was one focus. And at Healthify Me, for example, we had a whole bunch of these hibernating users who have the app on their phones, but have not launched it in the last 30 days. How do I revive all of these hibernating cohorts? One of the things that used to work well for us was we used to use a lot of live content to actually reactivate these cohorts. For example, Instagram lives, which were streamed live on the app, were a great way for us to revive a lot of these cohorts. So we used to have some of our top nutritionists come in and talk about benefits of vegan diet, benefits of keto diet, dangers of crash dieting, etc., which was a great way for me to get these people to launch the app again and refunnel them. So that's the third use case for which you use engagement and nurturing. I know that most of you here are entrepreneurs and business owners, and we've been talking a lot of marketing jargon. And I'm sure a lot of you essentially enjoy business jargons and are more comfortable with terms like top line and bottom line more so than marketing jargon. So if you are a CEO, in very simple terms, if I were to explain to you the need for engagement and nurturing, there are two strong reasons. The first one is your sales team is going to be happier. They're going to be more productive. I don't know about you guys, but all of the CEOs that I worked with, their favorite teams are the sales teams. They see the sales teams as the ones who bring in the money, and the marketing teams, unfortunately, as the ones who end up spending their money. And despite being a marketer myself, I need to acknowledge that fact of life. And essentially, through this, you can essentially make your sales team more productive. How? Let's again understand this as an example. Bonnie runs a company, 5 inside sales folks in the company. They make 20 calls a day, work for 20 days a month, which means they can, if my math is right, get in touch with, they can make 2,000 calls a month. For simplicity's sake, let's assume that each of these calls is made to a unique prospect. So which means they can get in touch with 2,000 people in a given month. But what happens if Bonnie's pipeline is 10,000 strong, right? What can Bonnie do? How does Bonnie's team make the decision of which top 2,000 to call? That's where the power of technology, the power of lead engagement and nurturing, power of marketing automation comes in, wherein Bonnie can send out communication to all of these different 10,000 folks across various channels, email, SMS, WhatsApp, browser notifications, etc. Observe the kind of engagement that they exhibit, open rates, click rates, how many people register and attend webinars, how many people actually visit the pricing page, how many people actually register but don't attend webinars, how many of them look at, engage with in-app marketing interventions. They can look at all of these different signals and create a blended lead score, very similar to what we used to do at Healthify Me. Right. And now all Bonnie's sales team now needs to do is to sort the 10,000 leads in descending order of lead score and call the top 2,000. Right. So what they are essentially doing is they're calling the top 2,000 have the highest probability of conversion, which means their time, the sales team's time, is being used more productively, which means increased top line, increased revenue for the company. Right. The other incidental byproduct and a good byproduct of this entire thing is that the team is not getting in touch with the remaining 8,000 who are not quite ready to make a purchase decision. They're getting in touch only with the top 2,000, right? And thereby they're not spam calling the remaining 8,000. The brand equity is not being eroded. So two strong reasons here: increased sales conversion rates, and of course, no erosion of brand equity. The second reason is that, and I cannot stress this enough, a lot of these marketing automation platforms through which you engage and nurture your audiences are by a factor of 10,000 or above more cost efficient than cost per click, CPC, or cost per 1,000 impressions, CPM platforms such as Facebook, Google, other remarketing platforms, which means for the same marketing spend, you're able to get as many or more customers, which means your cost of customer acquisition, which is the most important marketing KPI, your CAC metric, starts coming down. Yeah. Moving on, a quick question. A lot of people ask me, how long should I engage and nurture? Right. And in the Simply Learn example, if you notice, we sent the communication for around 18 days. Rule of thumb is you send your engagement and nurture communication via the marketing automation platform for approximately 3/4 of your sales lifecycle. In the Simply Learn case, it's a month. So we used to send it for around 18-21 days. If you're Infosys, for example, if you're in the B2B space, where your sales life cycles are 12 months, 24 months, etc., you might be better off sending monthly newsletters. It would have been stupid if you had followed the Simply Learn model for Infosys, send your prospect 5 emails in 18 days. The guy would mark you as spam. Or the Simply Learn case, if you had to send 5 emails in 2 days, Bonnie would have marked me spam. Or if I had said send Bonnie 1 email every month in the Simply Learn case, that's the other end of the spectrum. Bonnie would have gone and shopped with a competitor. Right? So you need to make sure that you balance it out, you space it out, and you send it for around 3/4, 4-5 interventions across 3/4 of your sales life cycle. And the other thing for you to keep in mind is it's like a relay race, right? With the marketing team carrying the baton for 3/4 of the race, and then they hand the baton off in the home stretch after they have warmed up the prospect through engagement and nurture communications, for the sales guy to come in and do the close the sale for the slam dunk, right, in the home stretch. Now we're almost down to the end of the presentation. We look at a couple of topics now. One is the need for repeat business, and this was a failure story. Like I mentioned, I'm going to talk to you about a failure and a success story. And in this was a long time ago when I was taking care of marketing and product for what was back then one of India's leading online ethnic wear marketplaces. And this was a company with a stable gross margin, stable EBITDA, high average selling prices, company with strong business fundamentals, which had positive cash flow, made real money. And it used to sell Indian ethnic wear online, and it used to customize these products according to the requirements and the body measurements of the prospect. And the primary TG that they used to speak to was the diaspora living abroad, not so much Indians in domestic India. Fundamentally because you don't have access to high quality tailoring options if you're in London, Toronto, New Zealand, etc. And that was the market gap that this brand was filling. They would, and customers would come and buy a 500, 600, 700 or a lehenga, sherwani, kurta, sari, etc. for a wedding, for any festival, Eid, Diwali, Navratri, and so on. But the problem was it had very low repeats. Right, customers would buy, make one purchase, disappear for 3 years, never to come back, which was a big problem because a lot of venture capitalists, when we tried to raise funds for the next round of phase of growth, they found the business to be inherently risky. They felt your business fundamentals are okay, but you are dependent only on new acquisitions. There is no stickiness built in. So it's like customers are coming in through one door and leaving through the other, never to come back. There is no repeat behavior baked in. So while the company is still doing well, it's never been able to achieve the kind of hockey stick growth that a lot of brands aspire towards. Fast forward several years, at Simplilearn, we were faced with a very similar conundrum, but we managed to turn it around, right? And Simplilearn, again, it's a very similar story. High ASP, high average selling price, 15,000-20,000 rupees, which is pretty expensive in the Indian context. So if I've just convinced Bonnie to spend 15,000-20,000 bucks of his hard-earned money on a digital marketing program, it's going to be a pretty difficult conversation for me to convince him to spend another 20,000 bucks on another course. Right. And the solution was we pivoted the brand to say that we're not just a training provider, but we are essentially a learning path provider and a career planner for Bonnie. My relationship with Bonnie is not just a transactional one. I'm looking to help Bonnie upgrade in his career. Right. And we targeted a lot of specific cohorts. And the pitch was this: we would tell Bonnie that you're here at the base of this mountain. You want to get to this peak, which is the aspirational chief marketing officer, CMO role, if he's in the marketing track, or the chief data scientist role, if he's in the data science track. And we tell him that you need to take this learning path to get there. You're in base camp of this learning path where you completed the first course. You need to take these 2 other courses and complete this master's program, which was being sold at 3x of the ASP, 50,000 bucks for you to have a shot at the CMO role. And essentially, it's a bundled offering that we were offering, but we pitched it and we packaged it as a learning path that we were selling. So we targeted a lot of existing, users, and we threw a lot of repeat drip communication across various channels. And over 3 successive quarters, from virtually nothing, we made repeat revenues contribute. The repeat revenues contribution to our month-on-month revenues became almost 15%. So it was a big win for us. This was completely incremental revenue that we managed to drive from our existing customers. This was a success story of how we managed to turn around the repeat business, in a brand many years ago. Almost down to the end of the presentation, we look at various ways and means by which you can actually drive brand exposure for your business. Now, let's try and understand this as a simple example. Again, Bonnie has a company, he has a social media team, they make a post, and the Facebook page has 100 followers. Right now, let's assume for simplicity's sake that when they make a post, all 100 of them end up seeing it. Right, he doesn't spend any money in promoting it. We know that that's actually not true. Mark Zuckerberg has gone on record saying that organic reach for brands starts dwindling as they continue to grow and scale. Yeah, but for this particular, so which means that when you're 100 followers, you make a post, 80 of them would see it. When you have 10,000 followers, you make a post, 4,000 of them might end up seeing it. But for this example, let's assume all 100 see it. This is owned media because this is Bonnie's own band of loyal followers. Now, Bonnie spends 10,000 bucks, and it's not a one-on-one correlation, but it was just for simplicity's sake. Let's assume 10,000 people end up seeing it. This is referred to as paid media because Bonnie has paid for this exposure. These are not his own followers. Now, there is a third form of media exposure creation, which is underutilized by a lot of Indian startups and brands, which is called earned media. Now, let's say Bonnie's team makes a post which is so awesome that 50 of the 100 doesn't spend any money in promoting it, that 50 of the 100 followers end up resharing it on their own social media platforms. And each of them again have 100 followers each, which means Bonnie's brand has now got exposure to 5,000 people, 50 multiplied by 100, which is something that they have earned through the strength of their content. It's not owned media because it's not their own followers. It's not paid media because they've not paid for it. Something they have earned, incremental exposure, brand exposure they have earned through the strength of their content. Social media shares are a great way for you to create earned media for the brand. Yeah, there are other ways as well. For example, PR is another great way. Let's say Bonnie gets featured in an interview on the Economic Times. Right now, Economics Times readership is now getting to know about Bonnie's brand. Bonnie's brand is getting exposed to Economics Times' readership. It's not owned media because it's not Bonnie's own band of followers. It is not paid media because this is not an advertisement or an advertorial that Bonnie is running on ET. This essentially is something that Bonnie has earned. Bonnie's brand has earned through the strength of the work that they've actually done so far. And the other thing that I would like to mention is there are other ways as well. For example, third-party discussion forums. Quora, for example, there are a lot of discussion threads on which is the top payment gateway in India. How do I make a decision? So as a brand at RaiserPay, I have the opportunity to inject myself into that conversation and add value. right? And that's something which is, in a non-salesy fashion. So I gain exposure to all of those people who are reading that thread. Let's say 10,000 views are there in that thread. I gain exposure to all those 10,000 eyeballs. This is not my own band of followers. It's not own media. It's not something I've paid for. It's not paid media, but it is something that I've earned again through the strength of my interventions. Yeah. Now, other ways as well, we've done a lot of hashtag trending activities. For example, on Twitter at Razorpay, we try to crowdsource a lot of information on what are the various ideas for unlocking growth. Yeah, that's something that we have done, where we've tried to crowdsource from entrepreneurs on what are their ideas for trying to unlock growth. In Healthify, we've tried to ask for people's thoughts on what their New Year health and fitness resolutions are, right? Using the hashtag New Year resolution, tagging Healthify. Similarly, at Simplilearn, we've done hashtag career wish. And social media shares are a great way for you to reach that holy grail of marketing, which essentially is around virality, which is a very abused term. But that essentially is something that a lot of brands aspire towards. And if you're talking about virality, we need to talk about a global phenomenon of virality, which was probably one of the first ones, Gangnam Style. And what was, probably the first instance of something going viral in India, which was the Kolaveri D song, right? Happened way back, almost a decade back now in 2012, when digital and social media were really booming in India. And while a lot of us, I'm sure all of us here, on this call would have heard of the Kolaveri D song, not a lot of us would be aware of some of the backroom workings that went into making Kolaveri D the viral phenomenon that it actually became. Take a look at this video, which will give you that perspective.
How much money do you think is required to make a song world super hit? 10 million? 20 million? We spent zero. Close the mouth. I'll tell you how. First, we shot the making of the song and then added subtitles for all the non-Tamilians. Then the most important, we added the collar ringback tone code for making some pocket money. We then put up the video on our YouTube channel and then feeded it on social media platforms, Facebook and Twitter. To get the audience watching and talking about our song, we created a hook, hashtag why this Kolaveri D, which is a commonly used phrase in my state, Tamil Nadu, when somebody irritates you. Next 3 days, full tweeting different irritating situations with the hashtag why this Kolaveri D, but we also added the link to our song with it. So people who could relate to that irritating situation clicked on the link, watched the song and forgot their irritation. They also understood the usage of the question, why this Kolaveri D? And then they started tweeting about things which frustrated them with the hashtag and also added the link to our song. Basically, people love venting their frustration on social media, and we use this insight to get hashtag Kolaveri trending on Twitter over 3 full days. Even people like Amitabh Bachchan ji and Anand Mahindra ji tweeted. The YouTube views kept on increasing. People were viewing, sharing. More than 41 million views across 220 countries. People love to ape a trend. So we put up a candid video of our own people singing the song in chorus, following which hundreds of people put in their own versions. Some even organized flash mobs, not just in India, even Netherlands and New Zealand. Oh, and by the way, the total collar ringback tones downloaded was 2 million and still counting. This brought us so much revenue that we are still counting actually. Okay, the enormous online buzz pushed even TV and print media to talk about the song. Articles were written on blogs, tabloids and even newspapers. It was featured in news channels and music channels. Every radio station in the country played Kolaveri. In simple words, earned media is estimated to be more than 67 million rupees only. Money spent, zero. Mission accomplished.
That was a pretty interesting video, and we could play a quick game of truth or dare. Right? There's actually one thing that this person has said which is actually the truth, and one thing that this person has said which is not quite the truth. Any guesses on what they might be? You can put in your answers in the chat box. That's actually true, Hari. The spending zero money, Pramod and Hari have got it right. Spending zero money is actually not quite the truth. I know for a fact that they actually spend some money. And but what is actually true and very interesting is the fact that the hook that they use, which is hashtag #Codeverity. But coming back to the fact that they actually spent money, it wasn't on regular kind of overt advertisements, which look like ads, but this was very intelligent seeding of content in communities, influencer marketing, which doesn't really look like ads, which is very covert and subtle, and which is true for Gangnam Style as well, by the way. And but the hook that they used, which was hashtag #Codeverity, was the key, right? Which essentially made their product relevant to the masses and became like sort of a glue. And this is actually true for almost anything that goes viral, right? It needs that certain paid media injection so that it reaches a certain critical mass of audiences, right? Before it can actually go viral. And of course, assuming that the content is inherently, viral enough. And that's true for almost anything that goes viral. It needs an initial fuel of paid media injection, after which the crowd takes over through, and then earned media takes over through social media shares, after which paid marketing can be shut off. It's like a rocket looking to escape from Earth's gravitational pull. It needs to reach that minimum escape velocity before it flies free. That's all I had for you folks today. Hope this was a useful session. And it was, added a lot of value. It was a productive use of your time. Would love to take any questions that you might have. Back to you, Bonnie and Joel. There are a couple of questions here in the Q&A. Where can I do bidding for SEM? Navya's question. It is on the Google AdWords console, Navya. The tool is available for free. So you can just sign up, go to adwords.google.com and you will find it. Hope that helps. Navya has a question. I've got a coir mat and carpet company. Which channel should I use? That's an interesting one, Navya. Use the same framework that I mentioned at the beginning. First, check if you are operating in a mass space or a niche space. From what you've just mentioned, it sounds like the space that you're operating in, thanks to the billions of dollars that Amazon and Flipkart have pumped into India, sounds like it could be massy. So in which case you should check out Google keyword search volumes and make Google your priority. And that will be my recommendation. I hope that helps, Navya. Wish you all the best. Any other questions? For Pramod has a question for B2B SaaS, how does LinkedIn marketing work? So if you're a B2B SaaS company, which essentially is selling to other technology savvy companies, Pramod, LinkedIn will actually work well. So one of the recommendations that I would give is create a named, I'm sure you would have a named audience list, or you would have a definition of your target persona. So if you have, for example, a list of say named accounts in India, for example, of say 10,000 named companies in India, which you want to go after, which is your target segment. LinkedIn offers you a feature called as account-based marketing, wherein you can run campaigns specifically targeted towards say directors and above, who are part of the marketing function or part of technology org in these targeted list of 10,000 companies. That is something that you could do. If you don't necessarily have a list of accounts, but you know what who your target customer is, you can also say that I am looking at technology companies which have more than 500 employees, and I want to run ads only for directors of HR and above. That is also another option. Both of these works. And you can run sponsored content or lead generation forms directly on LinkedIn. I hope that helps you, Pramod. Wish you all the best. Some more questions coming in the Q&A. Hari has a question. How do you reduce marketing automation costs? Use one of the platforms that I mentioned, Hari. I think that will really help, right? MoEngage, WebEngage, Fresh Marketer, Zoho. A lot of Zoho is like a fantastic product, hardly costs you anything. That will be my suggestion. Rakesh has a question. How do you market B2B technical plastic wires? Interesting. So I'm assuming that I don't know enough about your business, Rakesh, but it sounds like your target persona may not necessarily be very tech savvy. I don't think digital will actually work that much for you. You could check out Google to see if there is enough searches. You are essentially in the B2B space, so I'm assuming there may not be too many relevant searches also. So I would suggest you use a combination of event-led marketing and channel partnerships to grow your business. Hope that helps you. Hari has a question. Are drip and funnel the same? No, they're not the same. Drip refers to the series of communications that you send out across channels, one after another. That is drip. Funnel refers to the regular funnel, traffic, leads, customers. That entire drop-off percentage that you measure, the number of people who make it to each stage, that is referred to as the funnel. I hope that helps, Hari. Any other questions that I can help with? Pramod has a question. MSME business owners, very similar to Razorpay. Startup and MSME business owners. Will Facebook be a good channel? It depends on the kind of product that you're selling, Pramod. If this is something that can strike a strong personal connect, you can drive a lot of empathy, then Facebook could be good. But prima facie, I don't think Facebook will work. There'll be a lot of, you could still use it, of course. There will be the people are still on Facebook, but the signal to noise ratio would be fairly low, right? And you will see a lot of, you won't see very strong ROI, which is why my recommendation is start with search, combination of SEO and SEM. I hope that helps, Pramod.
Sir, I have a question.
Yeah.
Can I ask you? Yeah, it's basically about influencer marketing, right? And how can we kind of balance this influencer as well as other, I mean, hashtag campaigns associated with this? And what's your take on this? That sector.
Influencer marketing, there are various ways in which you can run influencer marketing, Joel. There is micro, macro influencer marketing, right? Micro influencer marketing involves working with micro influencers who are like regular people like you and me, right? Who have our own set of micro, small communities. But we have a lot of engagement on Facebook. It could be on Facebook, it could be on Instagram, it could be on Twitter. Macro influencers essentially are people like Amitabh Bachchan, right? Hrithik Roshan, Mammootty, Mohanlal, all of these folks, right? Who have huge communities, huge followings, and they are big personalities, right? On social media and in real life. Now, you could work with either a few number of macro influencers or you could work with a large number of micro influencers as part of your influencer marketing strategy. It depends on what your primary objective is as a brand. If you're operating in a space where trust and credibility are the most important, you work with micro influencers. If say glamour quotient and glamour appeal is the prime and buzz building, brand buzz building is your primary objective, work with macro influencers. So if you are a fashion tech company, for example, if you're a Nykaa, you're a Myntra, you would work with macro influencers. If you're a proactive health tech company like a Healthify.me, for example, we used to work with a lot of micro influencers because trust and credibility for us was more important than flash and glamour appeal and buzz building. I hope that helps you, Goel, and answers your question.
Sure, sir. Got it.
Rakesh has a question, one product, fishing lines or wires, how to find the segment. I'm not sure I quite understand your question, Rakesh. If you don't mind, if you can unmute yourself and speak. There are no other questions. Then thank you so much.
Hello, are you able to hear me?
Yeah, Rakesh, go ahead.
Yeah, please. I want to understand, for example, if we have to target these fishing lines, traders or purchasers or importers all over the world. So how to find this segment? How do we go about it?
So this is going to be fairly interesting if it's this kind of a space that you're talking about, Rakesh. You could check out LinkedIn once. I doubt if LinkedIn will work, but you could check out if any of these folks are on LinkedIn. LinkedIn has a strong search feature. Plus, if you sign up for a B2B account on LinkedIn, you can have a more advanced search feature where you can actually search if your target customers are actually on LinkedIn. If they are, you could run campaigns there. I would not recommend Facebook or YouTube because for the same reasons that I mentioned to the other person who was operating in the Pramod, right, who's also in the B2B space, because your ROI would be very poor. These people will be on Facebook and YouTube, but you will not be able to target them very accurately. You will also be spending a lot of money and wasting a lot of money in targeting irrelevant audiences. Google could have potentially worked, but you're operating in the B2B space, very, very niche, which is why I think you should explore, Rakesh, and this is a recommendation without me completely understanding your business. Let me just qualify that statement, but you should look at a combination of channel partnerships where you work with other brands who already have networks and who work with all of these people, right? Fishing exporters, etc., fishing line exporters that you are looking at targeting, or event-led acquisition, wherein you conduct events, you work with chapter associations. Let's say you want to target all of those people in, say, South Africa. who are fishing line exporters, for example, you target, there must be a chapter association in South Africa for these fishing line exporters, or the exporters chapter association in South Africa. Target them. Or if your target clientele is fishing line exporters from India, there are enough and more export associations in India which whom you can work with as channel partners and run events for you to engage and nurture these audiences. Hope that helps, Rakesh. Wish you all the best.
Thank you. Thank you. We are struggling to find this.
Sure. How does influencer marketing work for B2B SaaS? I think in this case, Pramod, you've got to, if you're operating in the B2B space, trust and credibility is going to be the most important for you, right? You need people to trust your brand. And if that is the case, I think you've got to look at customer testimonial-led communication. To me, you look at your customers as your influencers. To me, that is the only way for growth. I don't think regular forms of having a third party who's not even who's probably a fake customer, for example, getting that person to say things for money will really work in this space. If anything, it might help, it might cause credibility erosion. But you should run customer testimonials. You've got, say, 20 customers today, have testimonials from at least 5 of them, and use them as your influencer to drive word of mouth. I hope that helps. Web scraping of data traders, that's another interesting one, Seshadri. Thanks for that. That is also something that you could try. Good suggestion. Is it legal? Seshadri's question. It is, if it is publicly available, it is legal. Is it ethical? It's not. It's in that gray zone. As long as it's publicly available, it's legal. It's not behind a login wall or a paywall. And this is something which is anyway available there in the domain, which you're just scraping. Google does this, right? Then it is legal. Is it ethical? Probably not. Any other questions? Can you explain how to get, there are enough and more freelance web scrapers available, and you can engage with any of them, Seshadri. That's what I would suggest. So you go to open up a task on, say, an Elancer or a freelancer.com, saying that you want to scrape information off the internet, you'll get a lot of bits and you can use one of them. Which channel would work best for MENA market? I don't think there is a channel per se which will work best for MENA, Pramod. It depends on the kind of your business. So if your business is MSME owners, I'm assuming, is looking at your previous question, you are looking to target MSME owners in, say, MENA. My earlier response still stands, right? I think you've got to look at a combination of, primarily Google search. Anuj has a question. Go for it, Anuj.
Hi, Vedant. Anuj this side. So we are a network company and we are into a niche market. So right now we haven't built the product. So our strategy is like we are building a community actually. So the thing is that we need a lot of content and we need to engage with the customer on a regular basis. So the challenge I face here is like I approach few freelancers for creating content, and I think especially people from here, I contacted few freelancers and companies, but they are not up to the mark. Like they don't have this technical expertise and all. They do have only that basic this thing. So the thing is that, like you told, we need to go into the very detail and strategize things because we have a clear opportunity here. So I need to capitalize on that. So my humble request to you is, can you just guide me on how to identify a good company or a freelancer? Or
that's a challenge, Anuj. That's a challenge that a lot of companies have, which also operate in a technical space, because a lot of freelance content writers are good English writers. They have a very good command of the English language, but they won't necessarily be able to understand the technical complexities or the business nuances. So there are only 2 ways to solve this. Either you write it yourself because you have the complete context, or what you do is you hire some interns in-house in the company who can essentially immerse themselves in the company, right? They understand your business, they understand your dhanda, they understand your product, and then they'll be able to build more context. That is the second suggestion. Or the third one is you give a very strong watertight brief to the content writer which also builds a lot of context around your product and business. That is the third suggestion.
Thank you, Veda. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, Seshadri, it's safe. And make sure that you got a legal agreement and everything that you signed to the web scraper, which essentially absolves you for any liability as well. Then it should be all right. Any other questions from anybody else? Cool. If there are no other questions, then it's back to you, Joel and Bonnie. Thank you so much for the opportunity. Absolutely enjoyed it. And it's back to you.
Okay, sir. Hoping nobody has questions. No more? Sure, sir. So let's wind up the session. So thank you, sir. Thank you from myself and from our Thai fraternity and from all our members. It was obviously entertaining as well as informative session. I'll surely check out your other sessions available, I'm sure, in at YouTube. It was worth every minute. So thank you so much from all of our parts, and hope to see you again in this platform.
Cool. It's been a pleasure being here. This is the third time I'm coming to Thai Kerala. Absolutely enjoyed it. Wish everybody good health. Stay safe and take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, sir, and thank you, participants.